there are different things you can do and different levels you can do them at. So what must we do? And when we say must, we mean that's a legal requirement. So you must have a driver's license to drive a car, especially if you're using it to volunteer or as part of your employment. Should is more of an ethical reasoning for doing something. I should keep the door open so that other people can see what I'm doing with my volunteer. And can is more about what's realistic. What can you do with everything that you're learning today and that's in your handbooks to be realistic based on the people you have working for you and the resources that you have. So the first one we talked about a bit already, determining the risk. So you as your organization can control the risk in each of your programs and in each of your volunteer positions. Like we already talked about, you can examine the potential danger that those programs or positions might have and what can be done to prevent or eliminate those risks altogether. We'll talk about risk a little bit more later on. Okay, number 2 is write a clear position description. At the back of the Volunteer Alberta handouts, there's a position description template as well as some samples you can take a look at. This sets a really good foundation for all your other screening measures. A clear position description lets your volunteers know that you're serious about screening and that there are certain boundaries, limitations, responsibilities, expectations that you're going to have from them. And these screening procedures that we're talking about today, and especially in reference to these position descriptions, they're based on the position and not the individual volunteering for the position. So even if you know someone, you've known them for 25 years, you should do the same for them as you're going to do for all your other potential volunteers. Establish a recruitment process. So there are formal ways to do this, there's informal ways to do this. It really ranges from asking your family and friends to volunteer, putting an ad in the newspaper, your coffee news, things like that. And it's important to be clear that not everyone who wants to volunteer for your organization can volunteer for your organization for a variety of reasons. There's a misconception that we drive along the road and we see volunteers needed, volunteers wanted. So people will think, oh, that organization needs me to volunteer for them. They really, really need me. But you can be somewhat selective with them. If you feel in your gut that maybe somebody isn't right for whatever reason, that's what these are for. Use an application form. And I noticed that is in your package that Fran put together for you. Application forms, again, just kind of, when the volunteer fills out an application form, they're doing something for you to give you a bit more information about themselves. And it lets them know that this is important for you and for them to get this information. It needs to be well designed. Something we like to try and do is look at it through a plain language perspective, because English isn't everyone's first language. So it's nice to look at these application forms and say, okay, would anyone be able to read this? So you can be a bit more inclusive in your organization. And ask information that's related to the requirements of that position. You don't need to know if all your volunteers have a driver's license if they're not all doing something where they're driving a car for you. Number 5 is conducting interviews. And we talked about this a bit before as well. This really gives you a good chance to get to know a person. And I know that there are sample questions in your packages as well from Fran. And again, that should be based on the requirements for the position, not for the person. So don't just fly through the questions because you know that person. And they should be questions that can be kind of telling. So scenario questions, role playing are really, really good for that kind of thing. You kind of get a good idea of what they might do in a situation that might be tricky for whatever reason. All right, number 6, references. I know a lot of nonprofits these days don't ask for references. They see that more of an employment kind of thing, but that is quite important. I know a lot of organizations who references, especially volunteer references from other volunteer positions, those mean a lot more than from an employer because it's something somebody went out of their way to do on their own time. And again, prepare a really good list of questions that's based on the requirements for that position, not just any questions. And this gives you a chance to talk to either past employers or past volunteer managers about who that person is, what they did, and not have a barrier of maybe them being there or them telling you, because they're going to speak highly of themselves, hopefully, if you're interviewing them.
A police information check should be done far more often than every 5 years, okay? And depending, I mean, it certainly depends. If that's what your insurance company is telling you and the lawyers here in the room, then that's fine. But I would think that as a duty of care that you would want to have it more than every 5 years. Every 2 years, 3 years would be much more reasonable.
All right. So the program that Karen alluded to here was the Volunteer Police Information Check program. It started almost 2 years ago now, and we have it. It's a pilot program for 3 years. It provides funding, not direct funding, but I'll talk about that in a moment, to organizations to cover the cost of police information checks for certain volunteers in certain positions. The application process is all done online. This is our website here. It's a form to fill out. You'll have to talk a bit about your organization, the positions you'd like included in the program, your screening policy, which now you all have, which is great. It's only for organizations who live in communities that currently charge for volunteers, so Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Airdrie, Lacombe, Vegreville. I think that's about it. So that's for RCMP or police services who charge volunteers for their police information checks. This doesn't include employment. So what makes an organization eligible for this program? They have to perform a community service, which churches do. We do have a lot of churches and parishes across the province that are involved in the program. They have to be a registered nonprofit or a society. And they have to have volunteers who are volunteering in eligible circumstances, which means those under 18, over 65, and with a disability, and they have to be in a position of trust or authority in relation to that volunteer. But basically the way the program works is if you apply, you receive a voluntary organization authorization number. It's a code, 9 or 10 digits, that then you'll put on your police information check, and when you bring it to your police or RCMP, they'll see that, and then they won't charge you. And we're going to move on to the next step in screening. Number 8 is conduct an orientation and training session. This allows for a period of observation, so you can see how they work or how a volunteer works when they're actually volunteering with you. A lot of people have a probation period, 3 months, 6 months, that's all up to you. That's really great to have too, because then maybe after 3 months you sit them down, you have an interview, ask how it's going, if there's anything you can do differently, anything they can do differently. It's just another way to train. Number 9 is supervise and evaluate. So this should be done by somebody who sees what the volunteer does on a more or less day-to-day basis in terms of how often they volunteer for you. Sometimes this is difficult if it's somebody who volunteers big brothers, big sisters. You don't always know that they're always volunteering together Saturday afternoons. You don't always know exactly what they're doing because you can't be there all the time. So it should be done by someone who can, as best they can, know what the volunteer does. Again, this is about the position requirements, there shouldn't be a general supervision and evaluation template for all your positions because they are all so different. And some will require more or less supervision. And the last one is follow up with participants. Listen carefully if they have feedback, criticism, anything like that. That's all great for your organization to help you grow and do better next time if you maybe did something ineffectively. But this feedback is really important, so definitely try and get that from them. It's like an exit interview for employers. Or even, it doesn't even need to be at the end of their time volunteering. It can be throughout their time with you.
Now I've had some time to digest it, and I've gone through the material a fair amount of times, and quite frankly, if we use common sense, if we go through the process, importantly to determine the low, medium, or high part of it, I really feel that in our parish, in Okotoks, it's not going to be an onerous process. It'll take some time, it'll take some changes in processes and procedures, which are probably good. So I guess I just wanted to say from my perspective, it's not going to be as onerous as probably you feel right now in your heads leaving this meeting.
We know that the 21st century volunteer is much different than the person who was going to volunteer at the hospital gift shop every Tuesday and Thursday from 2 to 4 o'clock. We know that we have highly skilled volunteers now. We have episodic volunteers, people who want to go in and just do one thing and then come out. We have people who don't want to be here in the wintertime. Aren't they smart? Aren't we dumb for being here? And so they want to be able to contribute too, but it doesn't mean a 12-month commitment. So we need to be flexible enough in our volunteer positions and what we're asking that we can engage all of our community members. I wanted to thank Fran and Barb. Right, Barbara, for inviting us today. Bishop Henry for allowing this conversation to happen in your community. It's far-sighted more than a lot of communities are across Canada, so thank you.